Okay, so welcome everyone to Managing Software Teams in Seattle.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, I think we've had about 25 sign up on the meetup. So this one's our first. So we've been using Eventbrite for a while, and I think we just run into some logistical issues with people getting the right links. So we're giving this a shot, and it seems to be it's working pretty well. So yeah, so we try it out, and like I said, welcome to Managing Software Teams in Seattle. Ron and I have been doing this for around 2 years now, and a good portion of that has been virtual in COVID. We started out in person, and we like in person, and we're going to try to get back to in person whenever the conditions allow. Say it that way. So, same agenda that we always have. These are 1.5 hour meetings. We end on time. They won't go late. Everyone's been through enough Zoom calls today, probably already. Yeah, so we talk a little bit about what we do here as an intro. If this is your first time here, welcome. Really excited to have you. We have usually a guest speaker. We bring in someone like David with some expertise to talk about a certain topic, and then we do about 15 minutes of small group breakouts, and that's that's really where we can get some networking in. It's not as great as being in person, obviously, but it's nice to be in that small group and just kind of hear about where people work and what they do, and really out of that we try to get some questions for our Q&A session, which is at the end. So it's really just a free-flowing discussion about the topic, right? And so that's the agenda. Let's keep going here, Ron, for the logistics. If you can get your video up, we like to see it. Keeps it more personal.
Gives David a face to talk to.
That's right.
Yes,
that's right. I just did some training this morning, and it was almost all videos down because it was a government contract, and so I appreciate videos up, right? And so yeah, so standard Zoom stuff. Everyone's comfortable here, and I think David, you're okay with people interjecting and asking questions.
Oh, I prefer.
Yeah, so ask questions as we go along that are clarification questions. David's got half an hour of presentation, and then we're going to break into these small groups, and they're an opportunity to introduce yourselves, maybe to somebody you know, maybe to somebody you don't know, and for your group to come up with a question for David that when we come back, then we'll round robin among the groups with what you all vote for as each group's most important question.
Yeah, right on. And so and that's part of why we're here. Okay, we're here, and we kind of honed this meetup group on meetup to software engineering managers. Because we want a place where software engineering managers can get together and network, do some professional development. I'm not an engineering manager, but I work on software engineering teams through my consultancy, and I see the struggle of the engineering manager, that there's so many things pulling on you, that it's hard to take a second to think about think more strategically about your teams and things you can do to improve them. And so Ron and I really wanted to create a place where we could build a community. I have a military background, and started Form 100 Consulting, which is really hire former military officers to come in and do agile type coaching, Scrum Master work, some product owner stuff. And in the military, we bring what we learned through leadership training to these software development teams. And all of us kind of noticed really early on that there isn't that support network we had in the military where we would talk about leadership and go through leadership training. And I've had before I even became like a captain in the Air Force, I had a full 6-week basically leadership training course, right? And when you get into the private sector, that's not something that's typically offered. So we're trying to help bridge that gap a little bit here.
Yeah, unless you're in a big company, and I cut my teeth managing at Apple Computer, and then spent a bunch of time at some startups, and then came back to Charles Schwab, where again a leadership program, maybe something similar to what Nate had at the in the military. And so the big corporations have this kind of thing, but even the big corporations are looking at how do we mentor each other, and how do we support each other, and how do we build those kinds of co-coaching and co-mentoring kinds of things. Up to Nate's observation of engineering managers having it tough. One of those challenges is Agile, which really changed the relationship of engineering managers and the job description for engineering managers. So you're looking at two pictures of my book. The left one is the first edition. To that one, we added a whole new chapter on, now that we're Agile, what do managers do? Even though we had dealt with Agile all the way through the book in the first place. So take a snapshot of this if you want to copy the book and take advantage of the discount code. And with that, I'm introducing David. So David, I ran into David for the first time when bring up my notes. He was giving a talk to a CTO group in London, which, being on Zoom, I get to attend too, and he got to attend without having to go to London. He got to give his talk without having to go to London, and he was giving a talk to the CTO group in London. And his comments on engineers and engineering managers having empathy for customers really, really resonated with me. It reminded me of when I was cutting my management teeth at Apple. And I was hiring engineers for not just C++ stellarness, but also customer empathy. And his observations on commanders' intent and making sure our teams understand our mission, and helping to get all of our team's arrows going in the same direction resonated for me. And it led to my listening to a CTO Connection talk. So he gave a talk for CTO Connection on improving communication with our CEOs, and that led me to reach out and say, "Hey, David, could you develop something along those lines for us here at Managing Software Teams in Seattle?" So David tells me he's failed a lot in his career, that his first jobs running technology groups, he was busy optimizing the technology, but frustrating his CEOs. And it wasn't until he had failed a couple of times that he realized he was communicating the wrong things. So while he was building great software, he wasn't able to explain why non-engineering departments should care. And that's where CEOs come in. So if the CEO didn't understand what his group was doing and why it was doing it and whether it was doing it effectively, it didn't matter whether the software was great. He was still a failure. So he learned what to communicate and about how to align what we're doing and what we're communicating about what we're doing, so that he ultimately grew his career to being a chief technology officer and a chief product officer at a number of successful tech companies, and opened a consultancy of his own out of Los Angeles, out of Southern California. I don't know whether it's in Los Angeles or not, but out of Southern California, that has done work with Disney, that's done work with lynda.com, and in Lynda's transition into LinkedIn, and has been in a bunch of very small startups and very large Fortune 500 companies. So David's going to talk to us today about some experiences he's had and his thoughts on succeeding in engineering management. So I'll bring down my slides and then you can share yours, David.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Thanks. Let me share screen. Can everyone see my screen there?
Yes.
Excellent. Apologies. Thanks, Ron. Thanks for the introduction. And I'm going to talk a lot about those themes, particularly things that I learned through not doing things correctly, and things that I learned making things better. So, but today we're talking about management for metrics for engineering management success. And as was said earlier, I'm open to questions anytime through the conversation, through the presentation, beginning, middle, and end. And at the end, I'll certainly leave time for you guys to ask questions, but don't hesitate to interrupt if there's stuff that you want to know. Ron mentioned about my career, and I started my career doing research and development in AI and ML. And actually, but my love of technology, my working in technology started much earlier than that. My first memory was watching Armstrong set foot on the moon. I actually remember exactly where I was. I was in my stepmother's parents' house in Scarsdale, New York, looking at a small black and white TV. And I remember Armstrong setting foot on the moon. And I don't know if that was the moment or my uncle being a physicist, but I thought I really want to do something with technology. And so I was, the kid in the computer lab that was all pasty because I didn't get outside to the sun. The height of my physical movements when I was in middle school and high school was, King's Pond to King's Pond 2, that kind of thing. So that was my classic. So I had this first job and I was doing research and development in AI and ML. And I thought, this is it. This is what I wanted to do. I really want to do with technology. And I really want to do this engineering stuff because I really loved Armstrong setting foot on the moon. And I found out I had actually made a big mistake because there's a big difference between science and engineering. And so we were doing research and development. So we would go and we would do some research and we would write a paper and maybe present at a conference and maybe a couple hundred people would listen and nothing happened. And so I said, well, this is not what I wanted to do. And I learned the difference between science and engineering. And so I went to an AI tools company. I started being a developer. And this goes back to the thing that Ron said. And I was really passionate about making technology work. Sorry, I don't mean to be on the slide for too long. Passionate about making technology work. And then I made those mistakes that Ron mentioned. Which is I thought about how do I write code better? How do I do that better? And then I was managing teams and I did the same thing. And I became CTO and did the same thing. And that thing that Ron said about me frustrating CEOs, that was true. I optimized in that. And I don't suggest that as a career move. And I learned there that doing engineering the most efficient is very different than running a successful engineering team and communicating well. All right, so I'll get off the side in a second, sorry. So I eventually, running engineering teams eventually was successful, helped grow real companies, and I learned stuff. And then I started an Interna about 7 years ago where we helped technology companies build good product management engineering teams, build effective products that actually move markets. And I say that because we go and we look at a lot of engineering teams, product management teams, and see what works well and what doesn't. It's one of the things we do. We serve as interim CTOs and chief product officers. We coach and mentor CTOs and chief product officers. And we've done it for a lot of companies. The reason I tell you this is just because we see things longitudinally through a lot of companies and so I've seen a lot of things that work and a lot of things that don't work from my own career and from other companies. And so as Ron mentioned, small startups, we've done 3 unicorns now, worked with the Walt Disney Company, and there's patterns that work no matter the company size in what works well in engineering and product management. So we're going to talk about a bunch of those today. Now, the ironic thing, and this is one of the things that I learned earlier in my career, the ironic thing about being an engineer or an engineering leader is you would think that these people are the best people in the company to communicate metrics to the rest of the company. These people are probably among the best at math in the company. Maybe the controller and the CFO or person who runs data science might be also really good at numbers, but terribly bad at metrics because the metrics that they talk about are the wrong ones. Metrics are mechanisms to communicate information to something else. Claude Shannon said this thing, and you'll see how nerdy I actually am in just a moment. Claude Shannon, with information theory, said, information is that which reduces uncertainty. Data and information are different because data is just stuff, and information reduces uncertainty. And the metrics we often communicate are data, and they're not information. They're not usable by other departments, by the CEO, who doesn't actually really care about your coverage or some other sixes we'll talk about in a minute. They care about moving the business forward. So I'm going to leave you today with 3 tools you can talk with your CEO about, and you don't have to read this. You don't have to read these things to point them out, but I'll leave you with 3 things at the end. And please ask me questions as I'm talking with you about them. But I want to leave you with 3 tools that are useful to you when we're done. Now, quick interlude. So help me with the presentation a bit. I built this metric as meant for presentations for engineering leaders and how to communicate. If people could quickly put in the Zoom chat the kind of metrics, how many metrics you have for the progress of your teams, the kind of metrics they are, how big your teams are. If you could put them in Zoom chat, and I'll refer to them later in this presentation. I'll give you guys just a couple minutes to do that. Are folks setting?
Yeah, they're starting to come in.
Okay, great, thank you. Great, I'll keep going. I see people are adding them now, thank you. So I hold that there's 3 significant stages for maturity for engineering organizations. One is when you're initially building the product. Your company is new, maybe you're seed or pre-seed, maybe A, and you're building a product, and everyone, well, in the before times, everyone was maybe in a room together. Now everyone is in a tight community, and communication is super tight and super easy because everyone's focused on building the product. That's the first stage. The second stage is when you're starting to grow, and maybe you have 15 engineers, maybe 25, and you're thinking about managing the engineering organization and how to think about the engineering organization and mature it. And the third is when you're focused beyond the engineering organization and creating customer value. And the things you think about are very different in these various stages. Now, here's the thing that engineering folks, and I'm going to look over some of you guys' notes here, often communicate, and this seems consistent with what people put in chat here. Not, it doesn't map one-to-one, but nearly. People often communicate about velocity and cycle time, peer response time. People put stuff in chat. Velocity, number of stories, points left in the backlog. I'm just reading a couple of these. Open support issues, cycle time, velocity. And these are the things that I'm seeing in chat are things that people often communicate to the CEO or outside the engineering team. And the problem is that communicating these metrics, the ones that are natural, the ones that are organic for engineering leaders to communicate, are metrics that will kill you. And what I mean by kill you is that they'll get you fired. And the reason that they're going to get you fired is your CEO likely A, doesn't understand them, and B, if your CEO does understand them, doesn't care about them. Because your CEO is concerned about growing the business, and these kind of metrics are about how quickly you run. To the CEO, these are input metrics. Activities we're doing, they're motion, but they don't represent progress to the CEO. Progress to the CEO is increasing revenue or increasing profitability, or it might be penetration or decreasing churn. Those are the kind of metrics the CEO cares about. And these kind of metrics are about running fast, but if you're running really fast in the wrong direction, you just get lost faster. The metrics the CEO cares about, or the metrics that the CEO cares about, are the ones about the customer. In engineering, you have the opportunity to create value by creating value for the customer. I hold dear to me, and this is something that I learned very much early in my career when I was doing the research and development in AI and ML, and I wanted to move from research, from science into engineering, is you can only be successful if you're creating value for somebody else. You have the ability to create a product, and by creating value for someone else, the metrics that your CEO cares about are a side effect of creating that value. Revenue is a side effect of creating value for a customer. And if you're creating value, good things happen. So the question then becomes, who's your customer? How do I create value for my customer? And I often hear my customers, marketing or sales, we serve these internal stakeholders and we create value for them. I often hear business and technology. We're the engineering group and we talk to business and ask them what they want. But that raises a fundamental question is, are you an IT group? Are you here to create internal value? Or are you a technology department of a technology company? Are you a profit center or are you utility? And you're treated very differently between these two cases. So I'll tell you a story. A friend of mine is COO of a major grocery chain. You've all heard of it. They're a national grocery chain. And he was looking for a CIO. And we'll call him Fred. His name is Brian, but we'll call him Fred. And so Fred said to me, you wouldn't take my job as CIO, would you? And I said, no, I wouldn't. I said, because you will only call me if the point of sale system goes down, and then you're going to be really mad at me. And I said, I'm here to create, I want to have that Armstrong moment. I want to do something that changes the world. I want to be the lifeblood, the profit, I want to be the lifeblood of the company so we can do something, which happens to make me in the profit center. I don't want to be in a cost center. And so, because in the cost center, they can only ask you to do more with less every year. Good job. Can you get more done? We're going to give you less budget. If you're in a technology department of a technology company, they say to you, what more can we do? How can we expand the product? And so you have to understand your customer if you're going to do that. And your customer is not the marketing or sales department. There's a smell if you say, we're technology and business is asking us to do that. Those groups are not your customer. Those groups are your teammates to serve some other customer. And you have to have that relationship to serve the customer. And then you can have a conversation with the CEO about what the metrics are and what you should be doing. So I often have this conversation with CEOs. I'll meet a CEO and the first, call it 10 or 15 minutes, I'll look at the CEO and I'll say, we need to talk about Jesus. And I try to look very earnestly at the CEO. And I'll say, we need to talk about Jesus. And the CEO usually will look at me with some kind of anxious, nervous look. And what are we talking about? and I'll look at the CEO and say, we need to talk about Jesus right now. And then the CEO generally looks very uncomfortable. And I'll say, oh, you've gotten me wrong. I'm not an evangelical Christian. I'm not here to convert you to accept Jesus. I'm not a Christian at all. As a matter of fact, I'm Jewish. But let me tell you why it's important we talk about Jesus. And then I'll tell the CEO this story about my second job, where I worked with a guy named Ken Johnson. Ken and I became friends, and he was an evangelical Christian, and he was looking to get married. So I said to Ken, describe the woman you're trying to get married to, and if I meet someone, I'll introduce you. And Ken looked at me and he said, David, you don't understand the problem. I was like, no, Ken, I got the problem. Tell me, do you want someone taller, shorter? You don't care. He was a black guy. I said, you only want African-American women, or you describe the attributes of this woman. And if I meet someone, I'll introduce you. We're friends. And he looked at me and said, you don't understand the problem. And I looked at him and I said, I was like probably 28 or 29. And I said to him, Ken, I've had some experiences in life. I think I got this down. So just describe this woman to me. I was getting frustrated. Describe this woman to me. And if I meet someone, I'll introduce you. And he looked at me and he put a glass in front of me. He said, David, this is Jesus. He said, I'm trying to move towards Jesus. He pointed to it with his right hand. He said, if I find a woman who's also trying to move towards Jesus, we'll tend to converge. You're asking me if I want to meet a 6-foot-tall black woman. I looked at him, I said, Ken, you're right, I did not get the problem. So then I'll turn to the CEO and I'll say, do your product managers, do your engineers know who your Jesus is? Because if they know who your Jesus is, they'll tend to converge with each other. And by the way, they'll tend to converge with the other departments in your company. They need to know who your Jesus is and what makes your Jesus happy. And that way they can serve your Jesus. That way they can understand the metrics. That way they can help produce value for the company. So it's important for your engineers, in order to produce these metrics, to understand who you serve and deliver value to them. So how do you know if they're delivering value? Well, clearly you need to know who the company serves, and you need to know whether the products you're building serve them and whether you're building them correctly. But it's important not just for you to know them, but all of the engineers in your team need to know them. There's 3 ways for them to do anything, 4 ways, 5 ways. Knowing who they serve and what they're building to serve them provides them context so they can pick the right way to do it. How do you over-engineer or not over-engineer? It's based on the context of what you're building. What algorithms do you use? What do you integrate with? How do you work? It's built on that context. If your engineers know that, if you know that, if your architects know that, you can start thinking about buildings. If your engineers know that, they can do it. What you don't want your engineers to do is every time they have to make a decision, come to you to ask if it's right. You want empowered teams. They can be empowered if they know who you serve and what you're trying to do. Scrum and XP particularly are great enablers of building things that have value, right? User stories talk about, we're going to build this thing for this user for this reason, right? Those are great contexts. You do them right, but those are ways of creating customer value. But now I've not yet told you what the metrics are. So I promised you there's 3 things I was going to leave you with. This is the first one, the epic statement. The epic statement is a way of describing the thing you're going to build and aligning it to value creation. So everything on your roadmap should have some kind of statement like an epic statement. You don't have to use this exact tool, but you should have a tool like this that specifically states why you're doing the thing you're doing. So the format I like is the epic statement. We believe by doing this thing, this specific thing, for this specific type of user, We will achieve this outcome for them. And we will know it when we see this metric move. Now, there's several components. The specific thing we're going to do, the specific thing, specific person or group of people we're going to do it for, the outcome we're going to give them, and a metric that we can measure to know whether we're doing it. Everything on the roadmap should have a statement like this. Or let me say, every user-facing feature on the roadmap should have a statement like this. If you can't state it like this, you should ask yourself, you should ask the product manager responsible for it, what is it we don't know that we can't state it specifically like this? What is it we need to understand? Now I say every user-facing feature. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have chores and you shouldn't have, there's not internal things you need to do for refactoring, that you shouldn't have spikes. You should have those things, but the user-facing things should have a specific statement about how they directly create user value. It's hard on refactoring sometimes to know how it creates user value. Maybe it's velocity increase and things like that. But for user-facing things, you should have an epic statement like this. That's the first tool. The epic statement has another feature, another attribute that's good. It tends to align your engineers. I hinted to this before, but if you think of engineers or anyone in the company like a vector, now remember, vectors have two attributes. They have a magnitude and they have a direction. Magnitude, how much they can pull, how much value a person can create, and a direction in which way they're pointed. If you want to have empowered teams, which I deeply suggest, that means that people are going to be operating relatively independent. If you have people that are pulling in opposite directions, you might have a lot of effort, but no forward direction. Epic statements align these vectors. So people tend to pull in the same direction because they have that context. They know what business outcomes they're trying to achieve, and they can think about, will this better or worse get the business outcome? I want them to think about good engineering. I want them to think about sustainable engineering, but I also want them to think about the why. So that was the first tool, epic statements. Here's the second one, retroing. People know how to retro sprints. At the end of every sprint, you ask, there's different ways to do retros. I like things we did here. I wish this had happened, and I will do that thing. That's one way to do a retro. And people do retros after sprints, and they ask themselves, how well did we do this sprint? This activity we did, what can we do to make this more efficient? You need to also retro major releases. The thing that we had on the roadmap, we had an epic statement for. Did the thing we release meet our goals for the value we were going to create for someone else? Now, this has an underlying assumption that they're not all going to do that. They're not all going to create the value you expect. That's okay. The thing about a product manager is it's impossible to be great at. If the definition of great is to understand everything that the user wants, it's impossible. There's a traditional thing about the product managers say the what and the engineers say the how. Just the way you might not expect that you can release every bit of code without a bug, every bit of code perfectly, get all there. The product managers also aren't going to get it all right. That's okay. That's okay. What you want to be able to do is after release, ask the question, what did we get right? Are our bet on what the users wanted? Every epic, by the way, is a bet on a roadmap. Which bets did we get right? And which bets did we get wrong? And what did we learn from it? The question is not whether you got them all right, but how quickly you learned. Early in my career, I worked at a company, we were building an, it was called Authorizer's System for American Express. You might remember American Express would have an ad campaign and they said, there's no preset credit limit. Every time you use your card, there's no preset credit limit. You have a preset credit limit for MasterCard and Visa. We don't have one in American Express. That didn't mean that there was no credit limit. It just wasn't preset. So we were building a system for American Express, an AI system, to every time you did a transaction, determine whether you could afford to do the transaction and whether it was really you. So they were doing credit limits on the fly. So I said to the person who was our representative at American Express, who was the sponsor, oh, our goal here is to get no bad transactions, right? And he said, no, that's a terrible idea. He said, I want to have the right number of bad transactions. Every transaction bad, that's obvious. But I can get no bad transactions very easily by having no transactions at all. The question is to get the right number of bad ones and to learn from them. This is exactly the same as epics on the roadmap. You want to get the right number of them wrong and learn from them quickly. You can't do that unless you retro the epics after the release. Now, you can't retro them the day they come out. You have to give them some period of time, call it 2 or 3 weeks, depending on your business. But you have to collect that information and use that as a feedback loop. So that's your second tool. Here's the third tool, how to communicate timing. And the thing that, going back to that theme that Ron said, the way I, earlier in my career, made mistakes, this is a major way I made mistakes. This is a major way that I learned going from first science to engineering and engineering to creating value and creating a product about communicating timing. So your CEO is going to say at some point, when is this going to get done? That's a, it's a very thing you need to be careful about timing and about predicting timing. But the way I did it the first way, and I don't suggest you do it this way, is I would say, tell me what you want, and I'll tell you when you're going to get it, and trust me. By the way, please don't bother the team until then. It's going to just distract them. I'll get it to you when I tell you that, when I told you I was going to get it to you. The problem with this way, it's a faith-based exercise. They just have to trust you on the way through. And the problem is that, as all of you know, I know for sure, predicting timing on how much engineering is very hard. You're not likely to make it. And so your CEO is nervous. And if you don't make it, bad things happen. So I learned that, and I went with the second way. And I said, tell me what you want, and I'll tell you what you get it. But I'm gonna give you a schedule. They put it online, you can see it, and you can track where we are. Now it's not so faith-based. You can actually look and learn and see where we are, and things should be better. That doesn't work either. Nobody actually looks at your online schedule and where you are. So the third way, now we start getting into land of happiness. Tell me what you want, and I'll tell you what you're going to get, and I'm going to demonstrate progress along the way. Very much just like demos at the end of sprints. I'm going to demonstrate progress along the way. This is better. This is better because now there's tangible proof of where you're going, and when things get slow or maybe times maybe you're slipping, at least they say what's going and they can redirect and you can start engaging in a conversation. This is better. And they also get to see things early, right? This is very agile. They get to see things early and maybe redirect if needed. But there's a better way. A better fourth way is, let's talk about what we're trying to achieve. And I'll tell you how we're going to achieve it and when I think it will be done. And then I'll demonstrate along the way. The difference between the third and the fourth is the engagement, not just tell me what you want, but tell me what our goals are, and I will create ways of getting there. That conversation is with you and the person who runs product management to achieve the goals. These goals are based on who we serve and the epic statements. This engages you in the conversation about driving the business forward, not just having metrics of motion. This empowers you the way you want to empower your team to build stuff that creates value. This fourth way of communicating, this is the way that you communicate timing. So I said there was 3 tools: the epic statement, retro, and this way of communication. Those are the 3 things I want to leave you with. Now, I don't want to completely denigrate the metrics you guys stated before, that I stated before, about velocity and bug coverage. Those are still valuable. Those are still necessary, but those are necessary inside your team. Those are conversations you need inside your team to be more efficient, but you also have to be more effective. Don't throw those away. You use those in addition to the things that I'm talking about. The other thing is, as I mentioned before, empowerment is important. Don't take away from your team the ability to refactor locally. You want them to be empowered. Everything is not just about user value. It is also about efficiency, but you and your team members should decide those things. Don't ask for permission for those things. Just recognize that those tools, those internal efficiency, nobody else cares. You do, your team does, they're important. They're just not for anyone else. So I'm gonna leave you guys with questions. I know we may not get all questions done today, so feel free to contact me later in any of these ways. You can, I'm dsubar@interna.com. It doesn't actually say this on there. I apologize for that, I should have that. But you can hit me up on the website. You can tweet at me at Twitter. As I said, we do a lot of assessment of teams. We do interim management. We coach leaders in tech and product. You know, I've seen a lot of this stuff. I am happy to spend time with folks offline, just someone wants to spend half an hour with me or an hour. I am super glad to do that if we don't get it all done today. And I think I'm out of time. I think I used just the right amount of time for this. Glad to answer any questions.
Okay, good. So we're gonna break into breakout rooms for 15 minutes. Again, the structure is introduce yourselves to each other in your breakout room, and part of your introduction is, here's the question I'd like to ask David, and then I agree in your breakout rooms what the most important question coming out of your breakout room is, and when we come back in 15 minutes, we will round robin questions to David. Questions? So I'm going to break us into 4 breakout rooms.
Perfect.
All right, here we go. And group 1, did you identify a burning question to ask David?
Well, we did. I mean, David already resolved those questions in our session itself.
but perhaps if it's burning enough, perhaps it would be useful for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think?
So yeah, absolutely. Been happy to share again, right? So basically, the question was about when we are reporting, right, the metrics. So it depends upon who you're reporting to the audience, right? If it's an upper management, like the directors, the senior VPs and the VPs, and the lower management team. So both of them have different aspects of the metrics. The upper management doesn't care about what bugs are being filed, what is it, as what David mentioned about what is the metrics, I mean, in terms of velocity, capacity. They only care about the health status of a particular program or what about the product, right? The milestones, the initial cost, right? And any impediments, any risk, that they can be prepared for the next steps of the particular program. Whereas those small teams who are engineering teams who are working on it, they don't care about the health status. They care about every sprint, what's happening, right? And the velocity, the capacity, the burn up chart, the burn down chart, the bugs fixed with bugs open. So all those stuff, right? So how we can achieve, two things, in just one way, right? In just one shot. So there was a question I raised to David, and he just really answered about stuff, how we can show empathy between align both the teams together and have it, come up to the same platform, and show the empathy, basically, what is required, adding value proposition, and how we're going to be helping it, making it a one way for our customers, and is our customers there. So
David, do you
there
want
was,
to add on to that?
Yeah. So empathy is the key. This is all about ecosystem, right? We live in an ecosystem where the engineers and engineering teams and the executives exist together with the end users who are buying the product or using the product, whatever it is. The way to organize everyone together is to get alignment, and that's the empathy thing. This goes back to who do we serve and how do we know if we serve them well. The conversation, the way to get the engineers aligned with what we're doing is having it tangible for them about who we serve and knowing whether we're serving them well. And that's how to get alignment. If the engineers fundamentally don't have empathy for who you serve, then the job is a transaction. I'm here to do some stuff that's interesting to me and make some money. And if I find something more interesting from somewhere else or makes more money somewhere else, I'll just go get another job. And by the way, it's just pointing to a different URL on Zoom. It's super easy for me today. There's 1,000 people. The differentiation is who we serve and the impact we have. And to be able to say, hey, mom, this is the thing that I did that I can explain to you, right? It doesn't have to be your mom, but it's that conversation and talk about it. I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned, I consulted to lynda.com. And lynda.com, they were doing, I think, $75 million worth of revenue when I got there, growing 50% year over year. And I was running engineering for them on an interim basis. And about 2 or 3 weeks in, I get this flame mail from Linda. There was really a Linda. And her flame mail was, this customer sent me this email. She unsubscribed from our marketing email list, and she's still getting marketing emails from us, WTF, except she didn't abbreviate. Linda was angry. And so I said, lady, just got here, don't know. I'll go figure it out for you and let you know. My internal monologue is, I don't know why she's so angry about this. And so I did some investigation. Turned out there was 2 email marketing lists, and unsubscribing from one didn't get you to didn't get you off the other one. And so I fixed it, and I went back to Linda and said, here's the problem. I said, by the way, how did you know? How did you know this woman was still getting marketing email from us? And Linda said, I read every email coming in from the users. We're doing $75 million worth of revenue. Linda read every email coming in from the users because she cared about, sorry about sneeze. She cared so much about sorry about that. She cared so much about the ecosystem and creating user value that she read every email. For the people that created the courses, she made sure they shared in the profitability. For the engineers, at the end of the year, if we had a good year, everyone got bonuses. One year, everyone got great max. She cared about the ecosystem. And that's the only way you can sustain a company that's a positively growing company, is to care about everyone in your ecosystem, which means everybody's got to do it. Linda was angry because we in engineering had failed in some way. That was an accident. I had just gotten there, but she was right.
Group 2, did you come up with a burning question for David?
Yeah, something that was common for all of us actually was, what are some strategies for concretely measuring value and being able to tie it to your epics?
Well, it's different for different companies, and it's different particularly B2B and B2C. But the question is it goes back to fundamentally the question of who do you serve and why do they use your or a product like yours? What is it they're trying to achieve? And how do you help them achieve that? That doesn't mean you have to, for every kind of possible customer type, give them all value. You should pick parts of the market you're going to serve and super serve those folks. But you need to understand what that customer segment is you're going to serve. Now, there's a bunch of strategy things there, like what is the TAM? What's a total addressable market space? What part are you going to address? How are you going to, there's that whole question, but you have to start that. I'm glad to try, because I may not know a particular market someone projects, is if you guys want to try me on some market, if I happen to know it, I'll say, here's some things I think you might create market value for. Or if people want to contact me offline, I'm glad to talk about specific situations, but I'll try one now. We'll see how it goes.
So in our specific case, I was leading a storefront development team, and we were responsible for getting folks into the funnel, right? But from there, we really struggled with any one thing that we worked on. If it wasn't an actual like marketing campaign that resulted in sales, right? Translating that into value. So we were working on improving our Google Lighthouse scores, try and get ahead of Google's algorithm changes, right? Translating changes to least contentful paint into a dollar value was, at least for us, we found it almost impossible.
So it may be hard to, right, because there's second, third, order effects there, but you can ask yourself, from a Google standpoint, are we attracting customers that are more targeted to what we serve? The percentage of people that are coming in, how many of them drop off, representing, not a good target, right? Because in that case, the value is we're making ourselves available,
right,
to customers that actually like us, and we're not distracting people that don't.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
So let's go to group 3. And it looks like Richard was throwing one out. Is that group three's burning question? Do you want to go for it?
Yeah, absolutely. That was our burning question that came out. And this is a tricky question, but is there any best practice guidance, David, in your experience, from how much time to spend on the internal efficiencies, the tech debt, the refactoring versus the user value? And if it depends, what does it depend on?
Yes, that's a great question. I'm going to definitely avoid answering the question by answering a different question that's related, that's hopefully helpful. Because I don't have a percentage exactly.
Yeah.
What I do have is a few things. One is, I mentioned this in the presentation a little bit, for local refactoring, I ask the engineers not to ask me for permission to do it. I say to them, you are closer to the problem, you are closer to the craft. If you're not better at coding now than I am, because you code every day and I don't anymore, we have a problem. So I trust you to make local refactoring decisions. Okay. B, if I'm running engineering, I tell product and the rest of the company, I'm going to retain a certain percentage of my engineering time to do refactoring that I know of. And I'm not going to ask permission to do that because I know that that needs to get done. Now, on significant refactoring that doesn't add immediate customer value, I'm going to engage with product management and the CEO and talk about why we need to do it, recognizing that if I say to the CEO, we're going to take 3 months to refactor everything, and after that, everything is going to be better, and you're going to get no new features in that 3 months, the CEO is going to say no. Because they're not going to believe my 3 months. And I'm going to introduce no new bugs, right? And so, I'm a big one for telling stories. So my first job when I was 16, I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I learned a valuable lesson. Now, when you fry chicken, Kentucky Fried Chicken, I actually learned two lessons. One is I learned I do not want to do this for a living. The second one is when you fry chicken, grease goes everywhere. And they teach you clean as you go. If you clean at the end of the shift, it takes you an hour or two at the end of the shift, and they don't pay you for it, and it's disgusting. If you clean as you go, then at the end of the shift, maybe you have 10 minutes worth of work and you do it. So I say to my engineers is clean as you go all of the time. I'm going to ask you to build the minimal thing, and I'm going to ask you to refactor along the way. So what percentage of the time is refactoring? I kind of can't know because I don't have even transparency to the local refactorings. But I do have transparency to the big ones. I don't know what percentage is, call it 15, 20%, something like that. The other question that begs is, what do you refactor? What is actually tech debt? I think people get this wrong a lot. Tech debt is what impedes development. So if it's ugly code that you don't touch, it's not tech debt. It's only tech debt if you go there and have to touch that code repeatedly. And by the way, all tech debt is not bad. By the way, all code is future tech debt. All paint on my house is future peeling paint, right? But all debt is not bad. Credit card debt, not good. My mortgage on my house, that's good debt, right? And so sometimes it's worth doing crappy code, particularly if you're never going to touch it again. And so you have to ask yourself, is this debt impeding me? In which case I want to refactor it. So there, you see how I definitely avoided your question?
Thank you. Skills of
So,
engineer.
so group 4, I think, John, you were posing a question.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm off mute. So my question was, can you give an example of good epic statement and or a bad epic statement and what makes them good or bad?
I'm going to answer the last part first. A good one is very specific and measurable in each of the parts, right? There's 4 parts: who, what we're going to do, what value we're going to create for them, and how will we know. They need to be understandable by the casual observer. I need to be able to explain it to a non-technical person, once again, to my mom, what we're doing it for, how and how we'll know. If I can't explain it to my mom, it breaks Breton's law of line. Breton's law of line. I'm assuming none of you know this because none of you knew Bob Breton. Bob Breton's the guy I worked with. I named his law after him. Breton's law of lying is if you can't say it in 2 sentences, you don't understand it directly. The Subar corollary to Breton's law of lying is you need to be able to say it in 2 sentences, 2 paragraphs, and 2 pages to know it deeply. So if you can't say it succinctly in a way a non-technical person can understand it, it's not a good epic statement.
Okay.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. It turns out I read actually, I think last week that what was the bongo playing again? Feynman. Feynman used to say that you need to be able to explain any technical concept to a teddy bear in simple words. One of my daughters is in med school, and she was studying. I said, "Well, can you explain that using non-medical terms to me? Because then you're ready for the test." I think it's the same thing. It turns out
Okay.
Feynman a lot smarter than me.
Thank you. That's good.
Was Feynman the guy who dropped the rubber band into the ice?
Yes.
The ice water to show the shuttles? Yeah.
The same dude. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Other burning questions. So we've nailed 4 burning questions.
Yeah, it looks like there's one in the chat. that I think, I mean, I'm definitely interested in too. It's from Steve. Steve, do you want to talk?
Yeah, well, we've all experienced a lot of different kinds of retrospectives, right? I just wondered if there's anything unique or specific about an epic statement retro, one that that you might be able to help us with.
No, I don't think there's anything specific about it. I think you still have to ask the same questions. And there's, by the way, there's different formats for doing retros. I like, I wish, I like, I will, but there's other ones that are just as good. That's just the one that I'm most familiar with. And I think you can ask that question of retro of the epic statement. And I think you should ask it not just about how well did it perform, but how well did we create the epic statement? How well did we put the thing on the roadmap? How well do we measure? I think those are all important to understanding the feedback loop on the process of product management, the same way you get the feedback loop on the process of engineering.
I noticed that you use the term empowered team. That lines up with some reading I'm doing on that new book, Empowered by Marty Kagan. Is there overlap there, or anything you want to say about that?
So I have not read Marty's book, but I've seen Marty talk a lot, and our ideas are at least in parallel, if not the same.
Okay.
Right. I just believe you can't fundamentally scale like a person, like everyone scales 24/7. Like there's no more than 24/7. That's all you get. And so if you want to scale a company, you can only do it by empowering a team. You could have a lot of people report to you and ask you everything. I have a whole presentation on the website about commander's intent and about empowering teams, which I, invite you to look at, or just email me if you can't find it. But you have to be empowered and aligned, both. Empowering people and then have them go in different directions, not super helpful.
Good point. Thank you.
Okay.
We had a question in group 4 from Samir was pointing out that that in a very large company, the CEO feels a long ways away.
Yeah.
And if you're a first level manager, so this is specifically a first level manager. So any tips? So, and
Yeah,
Samir, if you want to jump in and say any more about the question than that.
Samir?
Oh, yeah, I think I'm fine. You phrased it very well, and thanks for bringing up my question. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, so think of the CEO as a placeholder for some upper level executive who's empowered, who's controls some division. So when I did work at Disney, I was eventually working with the president of Disney ABC Television Group. I met the CEO once in passing, and I'm sure Bob Iger does not remember me, right? But I never needed to speak to Iger. I spoke to the president of Disney ABC Television Group, but you don't even need to speak to that person, right? Because the question is what is the independent unit that's producing some value where the leader of that unit is empowered to make executive decisions? That's the person that's a placeholder for or the CEO is a placeholder for that person. It doesn't have to be the CEO. But even in that case, the more information you give that person is eventually talking to someone who's talking to the CEO, talking to the CEO directly. You can supplying that person with information and about how you're creating value and how to expand the company. That's helpful for that person too. That person, create value for that person. That person's going to remember you too.
Thank you so much.
No
That's a
problem.
good validation.
So
Thank you, John.
other burning questions?
Maybe another question from my end. So we talked about metrics, the way to communicate to upper management or CEO level. What are other ways to communicate, and maybe beyond that, any good question to the group, any good book suggestions about communication?
Well, here's something that was implied in the talk that I didn't talk about specifically, is the communication between product management and engineering. I have this fundamental concept of that they're actually one team, not two teams. One of the reasons that I want engineers to know the why is I want them to argue about it with the product managers. That argument might be, oh, here's something else. I understand what we're trying to do. Here's something else that I know that we can do because I know the technology. What about this product manager? They still get to decide the what, but I want the engineers engaged in that. Or I want them to say, product manager, you asked for this, that's gonna take a long time. That's gonna take 3 months, whatever. I can do the 80% of it in 2 weeks. What do you think, right? I want that communication. I want them to think as peers. By the way, I want the product managers to say to the engineers, help me understand that architecture you're gonna build. What about this, right? I want everyone a little bit engaged in the other one's field because they're teammates. I had CEOs I worked for that said, I want a tension between product management and engineering. I want them to argue. I think that's good. And I went, I think you're an idiot. I didn't say that. But I don't think that's good. I don't mind them arguing ideas and come at them, but I don't want to create a situation where they're just always in tension. I don't want a situation where there's up in tension, because then there's finger pointing, there's when something fails, it's that person's fault. No, it's that person's fault. If something fails, it's our fault. Product management engineering. If something succeeds, we did that.
So I'm gonna do a follow on that, David. So occasionally you have a team of engineers, the majority of whom, one of whom, all of whom say, well, who's this product manager guy or woman who says, what to do? I know what we're, where I'm going.
Sorry, was that you were asking me about that, or?
Yeah. So how do you manage? So we're all managers of engineers, and occasionally we get engineers who ignore product managers.
Yeah, well, then the product manager needs to have a conversation first with that engineer, or then that engineer's manager, to say, hey, we're either in this together or we're not. I think we should be. And this is, we need to work on this together. Now, there are some cultures that are engineering forward cultures. Google is an engineering forward culture, and product managers are essentially not empowered. There's some cultures that are the other way, where they're product management forward cultures. There's design forward cultures like, the Steve Jobs, Johnny Ives, Apple culture was, right? And there's some culture where some take a backseat to the other, but it's the cultures where they're empowered together to drive something that I think tend to create the best results. Now, if you're a product manager in Google, what does that mean? By the way, Google's a big company. Different groups are different, right? You might, that may not be your optimal place to be if you want to be empowered. If you want to, maybe if you want to just follow orders and that's the thing you want to do, then maybe, right? I'm painting a black and white picture. It's much more gray than that.
Yeah, I think where I was going was engineers who don't trust product management to make the right decisions.
Yeah, but I think that's a conversation of with the engineer is explain, earnestly explain, like, this is what we're trying to do. This is why. By the way, I do at the end of the day decide the what, and you do at the end of the day decide the how. I do want your opinion because there's stuff that you're going to know that I'm not going to know. But at the end of the day, I get to decide the what, and I'm sorry, right? I think it's a conversation, and that might be an engineering problem more than a product manager. You might have a bad product manager. The engineer might be right? But that's a conversation between that project manager and that engineer or the engineering manager and having that conversation about it. If you have a bad actor, then there's other ways of solving it that aren't so fun.
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we are right at about time. I know that, I said we were talking in our group, we've all probably been on Zoom calls all day as well. So like to make sure we end these on time. And I want to say thanks to everybody who did take the time out of their day to come to this. David, thank you so much for volunteering to come in, for presenting, and
Huge thank you to
Yeah.
David for spending an hour and a half with us.
No problem. Thank you guys. Frankly, I enjoy doing these, and I love the questions and the conversations back and forth. So thank you for hosting me.
Yeah. Well, we're super happy to have you. And again, for everybody on the call, the meetup is going to probably be where we go from now on, is where we're going to keep these events. And as soon as we can and feel comfortable doing them in person, we'll start to get those out as well. Richard might be a tough haul, but if you want to fly on up, Richard's in New Zealand.
Look forward to it.
And John's out in Maryland, and we've got a few.
That's right.
A few.
So
folks.
we'll still keep them online as well. But
we'll see if we can figure this out.
Thanks, guys.
All right. So thank you all.
Yeah.